Which Dishonored protagonist is the best? Or at least which is my favorite? I'm not really a huge fan of stealth games. My favorite thing about Dishonored's developer Arcane is how they create worlds for the player to explore. And if you're more a fan of role-playing an assassin than I am, I can understand why you'd prefer a different player character. But I found one of the series' 4 protagonists to be head and shoulders above all the rest for what I enjoy in the games. Now, mild spoiler warning, I'm going to talk about stuff in the first few levels of both the main games and their DLCs. I'm going to try and avoid whatever major spoilers I can, but details from the beginning of later games just inevitably spoil some parts of the earlier ones. So anyway, I want us to consider 2 things when talking about these protagonists: their relationship to the game's antagonizing force, and their relationship to the world they inhabit. The original Dishonored's protagonist is Corvo Attano. He's the royal protector of his queen and her young daughter Emily. The game begins with the assassination of the queen, Emily being kidnapped, and Corvo being blamed for everything. It's immediately clear this was a power grab by other higher-ups in the royal court, so when Corvo escapes from prison, he makes it his goal to rescue Emily and return her to power in the kingdom. The antagonizing forces, everything that separates Corvo from Emily, are quite clearly evil, and people were motivated to stop by just nature of wanting to rescue a kid.
Her daughter Emily is hidden away, and no one will ever know the truth.
The game city of Dunwall is also ravaged by a deadly illness called the Rat Plague under the new coup leadership, so it feels like most of the bad things in the world fall on the direct line between you and rescuing Emily. This is awesome, and a lot of why the story in the first game is so strong. But Corvo's relationship to the world around him in the city of Dunwall doesn't exactly complement what my favorite parts of the game are. Corvo is concerned with just one thing: saving Emily, and as a result has a vested interest in understanding those who are an obstacle to her rescue. He becomes a judgmental lens on some of the worst elements of Dunwall, discovering who they are and their worst deeds before passing a sentence. The game makes an overt homage to the Edgar Allan Poe story Mask of the Red Death, about the rich elite of a society who hide away from a plague called the Red Death and party while the society around their castle walls crumbles, until a partygoer dressed as the Red Death shows up and pisses everyone off because they can no longer ignore the suffering they've been avoiding. The first Dishonored lets you see the world from behind Corvo's mask, fighting through the upper class of Dunwall as they allow those less fortunate to be devoured by a plague of rats. This is perfect for the stealth assassination part of the game, but I felt especially the first Dishonored was a pretty good stealth game with then fantastic world building and environmental design. And it makes sense for Corvo to want to know what's going on with his targets, but a little less for him to care about the world outside them. Like when trying to garner that information for myself, it felt like something Moxy was doing, not something Corvo was interested in. The working class issues of Dunwall don't really fall on the direct line between Corvo and rescuing Emily. I do think this improves for the second game though, at least if you play as the character I did. I haven't played this more than once yet. The second game allows you to play as Emily Caldwell 15 years after the first game. She's now Empress and all grown up. She has to rule over 4 entire kingdoms, each with their own complex issues and idiosyncratic rulers. The minutia of what's going on in the world around her is really complicated because her goals are very complicated and difficult. Her responsibilities extend beyond just looking after one person. At least the way I played her, she was very concerned with things affecting everyone in her kingdom and wanted to set them right. When she's absorbing every detail about the way that silver miners are treated, I really do believe she cares. One of the best parts of this series are their non-lethal takedowns, ways in which you can be rewarded as a player for paying attention to the environment and learning things about your target. With Corvo, these are often fates worse than death, life imprisonment or exile. But with Emily, they're often ways to set the world right, to repair damage and leave things better than when she found them. Unfortunately, Emily's relationship to her antagonizing forces are a lot less clean than Corvo's. At the beginning of the game, she's cooed out of power and has to flee Dunwall and unravel the mystery of how she was dethroned and how she can become Empress again. Where I found things got muddy is that a lot of the game involves Emily going abroad and encountering problems that developed during her time as Empress, and have causes that don't really come from the coup but just her incompetence as a leader. There's some interesting stuff of her reflecting on ways in which she failed.
What was I doing during that time? Pretending to listen at court, ruling through an army of bureaucrats.
But the game is primarily about her returning to her throne and getting revenge, and her learning to be a better leader second. The major problems of the world don't fall as neatly between protagonist and antagonist as they did in Dishonored 1. Or at the very least, it's more motivating to fight people who murdered a mother in front of her child and then kidnapped the child than for someone to want a do-over after they messed up.
If only I could go back.
So in my mind, Corvo and Emily have inverse strengths. I really like Corvo's relationship to his antagonists, and I really like Emily's relationship to the world around her. Dishonored 2 also has kind of a sequel / standalone downloadable content called Death of the Outsider. There's some really creative environments and gameplay concepts, but I didn't find the story or its protagonist that interesting. I just wanted to get that out of the way before talking about the protagonist I think is the perfect meld of both Corvo and Emily's strengths. That is Dowd from Dishonored 1's expansions Knife of Dunwall and Witches of Brigmore. We first encounter Dowd when playing as Corvo when he sets the plot in motion by stabbing a sword through the stomach of the Empress. His expansions take place at roughly the same time as the original game, as Dowd begins experiencing self-loathing over actions he realizes plunged the world into chaos. And this self-loathing is easy to feel because Dowd was one of the antagonists of the base game. And really, he's the antagonist of these expansions too, or at least the results of his actions killing the Empress are. Unlike Emily, Dowd starts off recognizing his own responsibility. His story eventually evolves to fighting specific individuals trying to fill the power vacuum left by the Empress's death. But these specific people are secondary to Dowd's ultimate goal of personal redemption. And while it might not be clear at first, everything he does in the story falls on a direct line between him and that goal. I also find his relationship to the world around him to be more effective than Corvo's. Like Corvo, Dowd acts as an assassin, but he's also a leader of other assassins. He runs an organization comprised mostly of people that used to be kids living on the street. His job is a lot more complicated than protecting one family, and his criminal enterprise is a lot more dependent on what specific issues are affecting every class of people in Dunwall, and what kind of relationship he can cultivate with each of its major players. Again, no, I'm speaking as someone who just loves searching for audio logs and beginning to understand what's going on in the broader world over getting psyched to shove a knife through somebody. But for what I liked, I found Dowd to make the most sense as a character who thrived through gathering information to carve out the best place for him in the world. Dowd is great, and really so were Knife of Dunwall and Witches of Brigmore overall. If you're a Dishonored fan and haven't ever played them, please do. They're great. You won't regret it. Thank you so much for watching. Everything before that thank you was recorded back in May of last year. This was supposed to be my May game journal video, but it just kind of sat half finished on my computer for 8 months. Luckily, that meant that now I could get 2 videos out really quickly. I hope you enjoyed them. Have a pleasant whatever time of day it is for you.